Greetings and welcome to another episode of Unpacking Islamophobia, a podcast project brought to you by The.Bridge.Initiative at Georgetown University. My name is Arsalan Iftikhar and I am a senior fellow at The.Bridge.Initiative at Georgetown. I'm also a human rights lawyer and author of the book, Fear of a Muslim Planet, Global Islamophobia in the New World Order. And joining me today is Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, a Democrat from the 5th Congressional District of Minnesota, representing both Minneapolis and its surrounding suburbs. Many of you know in January 2019, Congresswoman Omar became the first African refugee to become a member of Congress, the first woman of color to represent Minnesota, and one of the first two Muslim American women elected to Congress that night, along with Rashida Tlaib from Michigan. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, assalamu alaikum, and thank you for joining me today.
Wa alaikum salam, Arsalan. It's great to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
It's my honor. And Congresswoman, you can't start a podcast about Islamophobia without talking about political Islamophobia here in the United States. And, many of us know that political Islamophobia is becoming a concrete part of the modern day National Republican Ideological Party platform to run for president, right? Many of us might remember Donald Trump and all of his stupid Muslim travel bans, but we often forget that before Trump got the nomination, there were actually 16 other Republican presidential candidates who were really trying to out-Islamophobe each other during their unsuccessful presidential runs. For example, we have former House Speaker and GOP candidate Newt Gingrich, who once called Sharia Islamic law a, quote, mortal threat to the survival of the United States. You have former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, who once publicly described Islam as a religion that, quote, promotes the most murderous mayhem on the planet. In the past, other Republican candidates have proposed requiring a loyalty oath for American Muslims, like the late pizza magnate Herman Cain, and one of them even said that both Muslims and Hindus should not be allowed to run for president in America. That was Trump's head secretary and former brain surgeon Ben Carson. So, Congressman, my first question to you is that as one of the three Muslim members of Congress today, can you please tell us a little bit about your thoughts about Islamophobia within the Republican Party today as we head into the 2024 presidential election season?
Oh my goodness, where do we start? It wasn't just the fact that it was used by Trump and other Republicans in the presidential, the 2016 presidential election to sort of gin up and mobilize their base through their hate for Muslims, and this really bizarre fear that they have that I believe is based on ignorance and ugliness, but Trump literally was the godfather of the birther movement, and that essentially was couched in this belief that not only was Obama, the former president, born outside of the United States, but that he somehow was secretly Muslim, and that was the disqualifying piece. And, we've come a long way from the McCain era of saying, right, like, this is not okay, to an era where you are encouraged to be as Islamophobic as you can be, because that, like, politically is the most viable thing to do, that there is an actual base ready to vote for you and support you and uplift you if you are willing to go down this rhetoric of Islamophobic hate, and it shows because there is no consequences, right? You had the Muslim ban. We obviously understand that their hate has also informed policy, but you also have people in Congress today who showed up the day Rashida and I got sworn in, and were literally chasing us around, trying to get us to get sworn in on the Bible, not understanding how that is against our constitutional right, and actually there is no requirement to be sworn in on any sort of literature from any faith group. You can basically, take any book from the library and put your hand on it if you wanted. To the Boberts of the world, who can openly joke about a Muslim woman getting on an elevator with her, and her not being scared because she didn't see a backpack that was visible and didn't have to worry about her colleague blowing herself up. And so it's growing, and it's being mainstreamed in a way that the denunciation of it from some of us really is no longer tracking or having an impact in any kind of way. And I think that's where the danger is, because the recourses for the kind of hateful rhetoric that is around the Muslim community when it comes to Republicans, leads to violent consequences. And it is scary to know that there isn't much that we can do outside of have these conversations and draw attention to it.
Yeah, when people often think of Islamophobia, they sometimes only view it as an American construct. But as you and I both know, global Islamophobia is metastasizing all over the world, and it's leading to genocidal levels in places like India, China, and Myanmar. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that, especially because of the fact that, of all of the work that you did on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. But I first want to focus on India, the homeland of Mahatma Gandhi, which is currently being ruled by a right-wing ethno-nationalist firebrand named Narendra Modi, who is no stranger to Islamophobia. What most people don't know about him is that in 2002, Narendra Modi was actually the chief minister, the aka governor, of the Indian western state of Gujarat, where at that time when 2,000 innocent Muslims were brutally slaughtered during anti-Muslim pogroms on Modi's watch. He was once called India's Vladimir Putin by historian William Dalrymple, and during these pogroms, large number of Muslim girls were raped, men were cut to pieces, pregnant women had their wombs slit open and their fetuses destroyed in front of them. And 2 decades since that time, the plight of 200 million minorities, predominantly Muslims and Christians and Dalits, pejoratively known as the untouchables, has only gotten worse with things like the Citizenship Amendment Act, the annexation of the Muslim majority region of Kashmir, and daily bias-motivated acts against Muslims, Christians, Dalits, and other minorities in India. And so, Congresswoman, I wanted to give you an opportunity to share with us your thoughts on Narendra Modi, India, and the future of 200 million minorities that live in Mahatma Gandhi's ancestral homeland.
Yeah, I mean, we should also say, the movement and the political movement that supports and that Modi is part of is also responsible for the assassination or the death of Gandhi. And so I think that's also a piece of this, right? That should be known, and those that used to be shunned in that movement for their involvement now are celebrated and are being brought back into public life as some sort of heroes. What's happening in India should be alarming to everyone. Obviously, to the United States, it is an ally. It is, a country that many of us know and care about. I grew up watching Bollywood movies, and there was this colorful India that sort of has always been presented to the world, that is multi-ethnic, multi-religion, and one that just seemed to be very vibrant, welcoming, and I think obviously the underbelly of the hate that existed there, and the one that is towards Muslims and any religious minority, it wasn't one that I think everybody has been made aware of. Now we know that over the 200 million Muslims that are living in India, reports are showing that India is on the last step of genocide. That if actions are not taken to mitigate, that there is going to be genocide of over 200 million Muslims in India. And I think the fact that there is still hesitancy, that the administration, the Biden administration is hesitant in marking India as a country of concern, is problematic in many ways. The fact that the UN has not taken any action, I think is problematic. And it's not only, I think, worrisome to those who share the Muslim faith or those of the diasporic community of India, but it is every single person that truly cares about human rights, that cares about atrocities and genocide, that is raising the alarm and saying there's something awful that is happening in India, and it's about to explode if we don't do something about it. And I think in many circles still, Modi is looked at as a leader of a democratic state, and not as someone who is part of a fascist movement, someone who has not condemned or hasn't taken any actions to stop this sort of slow movement towards genocide of Muslim minorities in India.
Moving next door to China, Congresswoman, and its genocide of 1 million Uyghur Muslim men, women, and children inside of internment camps. It's pretty astonishing that the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics were allowed to start and finish without a peep from the international community, condemning China's attempt at erasing Islamic identity from across China. According to the Atlantic magazine, inside these internment camps, many Uyghur Muslims have been forced to renounce Islam, criticize basic Muslim practices, and even recite communist propaganda songs during their daily routines. There is systemic rape and torture, people being forced to eat pork and drink alcohol, both of which are forbidden to observant Muslims. And really, the Chinese government is, again, allowed to commit this slow genocide of 1 million of its own people inside internment camps and get to host an Olympic Games. And so, Congresswoman, can you please tell us your views on China and its ongoing genocidal campaign of ethnic cleansing against 1 million plus Uyghur Muslim men, women, and children, and why the American government and international community should take more action against them?
Yeah, I mean, this is another case that is baffling, heartbreaking, and really problematic, I think, to anybody who really cares about human dignity and humanity in general. Yesterday, I had 2 women who were held in those encampments, who, one of the women was there for 11 months, the other was there, I think, 2 years, and then a third woman was also with them, whose sister has been held since 2018, and they, in a very heartbreaking way, describe the ordeal they've gone through, the constant rapes they endured, the separation from their families, the humiliating conditions they had to live with, the torture they had to endure. But also talked about after their release and even prior to being put in the encampments, that they somehow had to have a Chinese person stay with them. And for each member of the family, there had to be one person. And, there's this idea that your life will be controlled and monitored by the state is something that, to us sounds insane, but it's normal life for Uyghurs in China. And then we also know about the harvesting that has been reported, harvesting of organs. We know the forced labor that actually is being benefited by some American companies as well. And although we have passed legislation here in Congress to support and uplift what has happened to the Uyghurs, to hold China accountable. Again, it is one of those situations where we still have not done enough. That there are still people out there who will say there is no genocide that is taking place. There is no systematic torture and punishment and imprisonment of Muslims in China, including some Muslim countries that have come out in support of that, which is something that I constantly do whenever I'm in the presence of a Muslim ambassador or any Muslim that is a head of a state, to pressure them to lend their voice to the struggle of the Uyghurs. And the last administration was willing to say that there was genocide taking place with the Trump administration, and we haven't been able to get the Biden administration to do so. I understand that collaboration and bilateral relationships are important, but we're also a country that professes values of upholding human rights and international law, responding to atrocities, preventing genocide. And I believe there is more that needs to be done. I do hope that folks understand what's taking place and are holding the administration and other electeds accountable. And I think in the case of China and India, this is why it's so important. People always say to me, like, why do you talk about Islamophobia? What does it mean? And it is not the one-off where, somebody's pushing someone down the street, or the removal of a hijab from a young girl, or, the kind of discriminations that some of us face in the workplace. But it's the severity of it that can lead to genocide, and we've certainly seen it in Burma, in Myanmar, with the Rohingyas, and so it is just for us to be worried, for us to be alarmed, because we have seen it quietly happen, and I think it's important and an imperative of all of us who have platforms to make sure that we are alerting people to the possibility of another or a similar Rohingya genocide taking place in India and China.
Well, Congresswoman, my next question is about Myanmar, which is right next door to China, the country formerly known as Burma. Under the watchful gaze of 1991 Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi, the military junta government has committed crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing against, as you mentioned, 1 million Rohingya Muslims who have essentially been ethnically cleansed into neighboring Bangladesh. In January 2020, the World Court at The Hague issued a formal ruling finding the country and government of Myanmar to be guilty of genocide. And 2 years later, Amnesty International publicly condemned the government of Myanmar for the grave crimes under international law. And so, Congresswoman, I wanted you to flesh out a little bit more about the situation with the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, who many of whom are languishing, as refugees in neighboring Bangladesh, and what do you think should happen to them?
Yeah, I mean, I recently served as part of a parliamentary inquiry into Myanmar and the atrocities committed against the Rohingyas. I was the only U.S. representative to be part of that parliamentary inquiry. There were members of Asian parliaments, African parliaments, European parliaments, and we ended up putting out a report. I think one of the things that people might not have seen, I think the Rohingya refugee story has been covered, but the actual atrocity has not been fully covered or talked about, right? There was mass burning of people's homes and demolitions. There was mass rapes, mass slaughter, where not just the state actors, but community as well. And I think the kind of trauma experienced by the survivors is also something that people are not fully thinking about. As a refugee, someone who had to escape her own country, I didn't experience the level of trauma they experienced, but it takes some time for you to be able to process that. I think just being uprooted from your home is one thing, but to be brutally uprooted from your home is another. And the reality is that even as refugees, they're still dealing with crises. There was just an article today talking about the othering and some of the brutality they're experiencing in Bangladesh. You take a community that doesn't, you take a country that doesn't have a lot of resources, and you have an influx of a refugee community that is dealing with a lot of trauma. The clashes can happen. I think the international community has a responsibility to support Bangladeshi government to try to make sure they have the resources to be able to fully take care of the Rohingya community, and obviously once there is a political solution in Myanmar, because they're still going through a lot of challenges politically, they should be able to be brought back and be able to live in peace in their home country.
My final question to you, Congresswoman, is about the European Union. You talked about the repatriation of refugees. I'm an international human rights lawyer. We obviously know the challenges that refugees face, but much like the United States and other Western nations, we've seen a meteoric rise of Islamophobia in Europe and the EU over the last 2 decades, from France and the rise of right-wing Marine Le Pen, Front National, and the 2004 hijab bans that then President Jacques Chirac had imposed, to Holland with Geert Wilders, and Hungary and the rise of Viktor Orban, and most recently with Italy and the election of a 36-year-old blonde fascist Gen X woman named Giorgia Meloni, who are all using Islam and Muslims as political footballs, especially for incoming refugees, the refugee versus migrant debate in many parts of Germany. And I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on the future of 50 million European Muslims and incoming Muslim refugees who face rising Islamophobia all across Europe today?
We're forgetting Sweden and and Hungary and other places.
A whole episode just on Europe.
No, it is alarming, and I am grateful to folks like you and a handful of others that are constantly trying to make sure the public, the American public and the world is aware of what is taking place and the dangers of Islamophobia and the policies that are informing it. Pose for the Muslim community in Europe. My hope is that the Muslim community in Europe sort of takes the kind of lead that we've done here in the United States. When there were 2 times, I think, where we were in the thick of Islamophobia, right? That was post 9/11. very dangerous time for Muslim Americans. And then the rise of the Tea Party in 2010. That was also all the anti-Sharia laws that were everywhere. I was living in North Dakota, so I experienced it in a very uniquely scary way. And I think that our response in both of those times, at least the majority of Muslims, was to say, how can we try to be as active as possible? How can we participate in society in a way that assures conversations are not going to be had about us without us? And I think us persevering and fighting through those hard times and not doing what some of the elders in our community wanted us to do, which was to hide, to diminish our light, to dim our voice. That I think has produced the kind of progress that we have seen for Muslims in the United States. And that is my hope, that they will take this challenging moment and turn it into an opportunity to allow themselves to dominate the conversation as much as they can, to prove that we are not to be bullied, we are not to be silenced, we are not to be eliminated from the public discourse. I think about the hijab ban and what that means in France. I think it's incredibly important. There was a campaign internationally to respond to that, to continue to have those kind of engagements. I think there have been Muslim leaders who've been able to respond to the Quran burnings in Sweden. The more there is solidarity between those of us on a local level and Muslim heads of state talking about the importance of us having our religious liberty respected as much as everyone else's religious liberty is respected. It's important. And we can't end this conversation about international Islamophobia without giving a shout out to Imran Khan, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, who actually passed a resolution at the UN talking about Islamophobia and its dangers, which inspired the Islamophobia bill that we introduced and passed in the last Congress.
Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, I want to thank you for joining us today on the Unpacking Islamophobia podcast, and I wish you the best of luck in the future.
Thank you.
For more information, please visit bridge.georgetown.edu, and thank you for joining us here today.